So I want to talk about two things, basically, as Humphrey correctly introduced. One is the setup now in over 40 countries around the world of this organization called International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. And also, then I want to go on to talk about peace on the Korean Peninsula for obvious reasons, because it's about the most fraught and the most sensitive issue in international affairs at the moment. And I think that not only UPF, but IAPP has a particular role to play in resolving that situation. So I want to explain about that. So can we move on to the next slide? So basically, IAPP was founded last year, February the 15th in Korea, at an inaugural assembly there. And it's now gone on to be set up in over 40 nations around the world, including Britain, United States, but also several countries in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and so on. Can we have the next slide? And this is the inaugural assembly. This is the speaker of the Korean National Assembly giving the address. It says International Leadership Conference, but it was founded within the context of that conference. And he's giving the inaugural address. Can we go on to the next slide? This is the auditorium where it all took place. Next slide, please. And then moved on from Korea to many other countries, Japan and around Asia, but finally at the end of last year, December, came to the United States. This is Capitol Hill. It's one of the Senate office buildings. Sorry? Okay, sorry. I thought I got it wrong for a second. Anyway, there you see on the left Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, Father Moon's wife, who is now the leader of all of our unification movement around the world, the Unification Church and so on. And she's addressing this very distinguished audience. I think something like 58 congressmen, that's senators and members of the House of Representatives, were present in supporting the event. And can we have the next slide?
Yes, please.
And the sort of guest of honor, if you like, and the keynote address giver after Mother Moon was Senator Orrin Hatch, who's, in the UK terms, you'd say he's the father of the Senate. He's the sort of most distinguished elder amongst all the senators. About, I think he's had 10 terms or something in the Senate. And he's a long-time supporter of UPF and its affiliated projects. Can we move on to the next, please? Then we came to, actually a little bit before that, we had been here in the United Kingdom, set up in the House of Commons. This is Committee Room 14, the largest of the committee rooms. On the podium you have a former president of Kosovo. You have a very distinguished, many of you will know him from television screens, Afzal Ashraf, very distinguished commentator on many international issues. Then you have Lord Eames there from the House of Lords, former Primate of All Ireland. Tom Brake is addressing the audience there. And Lord Ahmed, also from the House of Lords, is on the right. And we had, I don't know how many, 10 or 15 parliamentarians giving their weight to the founding of the Parliamentarians for Peace in this country. Can we move on to the next? So, what are the key action areas of IAPP? Actually, it was described very well earlier before, I think by Humphrey, when he said that International Parliamentarians for Peace has an incredible resource to draw on. And this is, I think, the great strength that it has. I think that Father and Mother Moon understood very clearly, more clearly than a lot of parliamentarians themselves, just what power and effectiveness parliamentarians can and do have, if focused on the right values and also on the right agenda. And of course, often that's not the case. But the key areas are peace building, interreligious reconciliation and development, peace and character education, overcoming corruption, and strengthening democracy and good governance. You'd be amazed how many parliamentarians are not focused on those things. As we know, they tend to be focused on rather lesser things, often very damaging things. But there are a lot of parliamentarians who maybe are not in government, but have very good instincts. And that's what we found around the world. Many, many hundreds of parliamentarians around the world are now signed up to IAPP. And given the right values and the right focus, they can do a lot. That's the point. That's the whole origin of IAPP's founding. Can we move on to the next? Anyway, I don't need to go through this in detail. I've only got about another 6 or 7 minutes. But in many ways, we can empower parliamentarians because of the focus on values, the focus on morality, and so on that we bring. That's maybe not the message they're hearing from their constituents, but it's actually something they feel inside. And this is a great force for goodness that can be galvanized, can be concentrated to bring about the necessary changes and also to ensure that the values that UPF stands for and a lot of other people stand for are upheld by our parliamentarians. Can we move to the next one? So one of the key things is supporting the UN. And when I say supporting the UN, I mean supporting the UN in a certain way. Because as with many parliaments and governments, there's a lot that's wrong with the United Nations. And there's a lot that could be better. And we think that UPF ought to be able to influence the IAPP ought to be able to influence the United Nations very effectively to focus on the kind of values and goals and objectives that we in UPF espouse. And parliamentarians are ones who have a special capacity, special position, if you like, to be able to influence the UN particularly strongly. So we want to work together. We do work with the UN to augment and cooperate in fulfilling its goals that are compatible with our own. We're actually, UPF is recently reappointed just a couple of years ago as an NGO in consultative status with ECOSOC. And from that position, we're able to work with all the UN agencies and so on. And we also, of course, work with other international organizations. And we help ambassadors for peace from all fields and all areas of activity to strengthen their understanding of and ability to convey the importance of leadership and good governance. And we do the same thing, of course, with parliamentarians. Can we move on to the next? So we try to address the root causes of problems, engaging and encouraging self-reflection and self-evaluation. This is very, very important because in Parliament, people get landed in parliaments. They have a lot of very good will and good intention to do good things, but they get into parliaments and actually they get either browbeaten by whips to do things that they'd rather not do, or they just lose their focus in the sort of the welter of things going on around them. And we've found that in parliaments all over the world that there are many people eager to get the kind of focus that UPF and Parliamentarians for Peace can give them. So we're establishing peace-building committees, and particularly in countries which are particularly downtrodden and in the very early stages of development, we've been able to provide them an agenda. And to give you one example about, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 years ago, I was meeting with the Prime Minister of Kosovo, who's now actually the President of Kosovo, and he said to me, you know, we would like to adopt UPF's principles as the principles of the new Kosovo. You know, Kosovo is a nation that's, 15, 20 years old. Very, very young nation, very underdeveloped, lots of problems. And above all, the problems it's found are really finding the right values to steer the nation. And he said to me, you know, we really want UPF to be that organization. Now he would say Parliamentarians for Peace. And to some extent, we've been able to do that. But it just shows how, you know, our concept is nations are these great powerful things, and they know what they're trying to do and they do it anyway. But actually a lot of nations like Kosovo and in other parts of the world, other underdeveloped nations, they're really looking for the right values to guide the nation. And we really believe that UPF, empowered by IAPP, can be that organization. So can we have the next slide, please? So again, I mentioned about eradicating corruption, creating friendship groups, supporting partnership between religion and politics to promote transparency in government, Character education programs, very, very important, because again, there's a great vacuum of values in education in many, maybe most nations of the world. And UPF and its affiliates have had a lot of experience, particularly in the old Soviet Union area, in bringing character education into schools. There were 3,000 schools in the old Soviet Union where a body affiliated with UPF was able to teach character education. Similarly in China, a lot of the schools have taught character education, which was inspired by UPF. Overcoming drug and alcohol abuse, and again, curbing corruption. Can we move to the next slide? Next slide. Okay, so that's all I really want to say about Parliamentarians for Peace, but I would emphasize that Parliamentarians for Peace is a very good vehicle for helping the situation I next want to talk about, which is about North Korea, because as illustrated last week by a lot of furious tweeting from a famous government residence in America, it's not obvious that President Trump is all that concerned about peace on the Korean Peninsula. He's more obviously trying to, from his point of view, solve it and deal with it. But obviously, you know, the bellicose rhetoric and the build-up of American forces in the South China Sea and other places indicates very clearly that if it's left to President Trump, let's put it like this, it may not end up in a peaceful way. It may not end up in a good way at all. And so what I felt, Humphrey's unfortunately left now, but what I felt very important to do is just to explain a completely different point of view from the Trump perspective. If you don't do as we say, watch out, we will blast you off the face of the earth. That tends to be the Trump point of view. And there are a number of people who think the same way. But Father and Mother Moon have had for 40 years a very, very clear perspective about the Korean Peninsula issue. And they predicted all of that time ago that it could end up in one of two ways, either Armageddon or a peaceful resolution. And their whole weight of their activity, their determination in so many ways has been behind bringing about a peaceful solution, the peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. And they set about already 40 years ago starting various projects and activities that would be the agent of this kind of peaceful change. And I want to explain just a little bit about those. I've got very little time left. First of all, there were student exchanges. They recognized that North Korean young people are completely subject, and if you've been to North Korea, as Humphrey and I have, you know this is true, that all of the means of communication in North Korea pretty much are completely controlled by the propaganda machine which is run by the government. So you only ever know what the dear or whatever other leader has been doing, and you can watch a lot of scenes of military parades, but you cannot find out what's going on in the rest of the world. So the insight that they had 40 years ago was bring as many North Korean students as possible to, well, outside of the country, to China, in fact, and bring South Korean students there as well, let them meet together, and let basically the South Korean students educate the North Korean students about what is really going on in the rest of the world and in South Korea, because unspeakable things are said in North Korea about South Korea, which are totally untrue. So they all have this impression that South Korea is poorer than them, in a terrible state, whereas of course it's booming and it has freedom. Of course it has a lot of problems as well, but North Korean young people need to know that. Secondly, performing arts is one way. Father and Mother Moon founded a thing called the Little Angels. You may have seen them in the UK. They're famous around the world. They're the official cultural ambassadors of the Republic of Korea now. They're famous worldwide, performed in the White House at the United Nations, as well as here in front of the Queen a number of years ago. And they are an extremely enchanting and very peaceful set of ambassadors for South Korea. Kim Il-sung, the so-called great leader, had the same idea. I don't know where he got it from, but anyway. He also set up cultural ambassadors based on young people singing and dancing. And he was, anyway, to cut a long story short, The little angels were allowed to go to North Korea. The North Korean group came to South Korea. And a degree of cultural exchange took place between the two parts of Korea. Then in soccer, Father Moon was great in the era of soccer, started many soccer teams, including in South America, one of the top soccer teams in Brazil. He had them come and play in front of 150,000 people in the National Stadium in Pyongyang and play the national team and I think also diplomatically lose, as far as I understood it. So this, again, introduced a foreign element into Korea, which is completely a hermit kingdom, the north part of Korea, and also engaged the passion that North Koreans have for soccer and for their national team. Then there's the best hotel in Pyongyang, which Father Moon had built, and is the sort of the hub of the whole international community in Pyongyang. If you go there, all the ambassadors meet there. Anyone who's not North Korean, you can find in the lobby of the Potonggang Hotel. Then he built a car factory. You'll see a photograph of that in a moment. North Korea's car industry, such as it is, entirely founded by Father and Mother Moon. And so they have all the cars driving on the roads of North Korea are identified with South Korea and with Father and Mother Moon, even though, in fact, they were made in North Korea from a prototype that came from SEAT in Spain. And then joint tourism ventures have been carried out, a tourism industry bringing people from the south into Mount Kumgang, which is the great national park of the two Koreas. There's a World Peace Center there, we'll see in a moment. And there's been constant diplomacy going back and forth. Father and Mother Moon, as we'll see, visited in the early 90s, 1981. Since that time, many representatives of them, including Antonio Betancourt that Humphrey mentioned, including the son of Reverend Moon, including all kinds of other people associated with them, have been visiting and building this relationship with the Kim dynasty, the Kim regime. And I need to explain, I hope you'll give me 2 more minutes or something. There's a big stop sign at the back. It keeps getting waved in my face, so I hope I don't have to stop. This is the car industry. This is No Moo-hyun, who was then the president of South Korea, visiting the north. When he visited the north, he visited the car factory. This is where the cars are made. As you can see, they bear a resemblance to SEATs. Next photograph, please. This is the Potonggang Hotel I mentioned, best hotel in the capital. Next slide, please. This is the World Peace Center I mentioned. This is a really bizarre institution. Why? Because in North Korea, probably less than in any other country in the world is there religious freedom. You cannot practice religion in South Korea, except in this building. And this is where unificationists who are working there as part of these projects meet. They have their Sunday service. They worship freely in the most unfree country religiously on earth. And I'll explain how this all came about, because it is a really incredible phenomenon. And it's an incredibly hopeful phenomenon for the peaceful resolution of the problems. Can we move to the next slide? So somebody mentioned about Europe, how we've done this. So far, 5 shipments of medicines. Can we move to the next slide? This is an amazing, again, a whole story behind this. This is from Poland. We were able to ship this entire X-ray unit to support the founding of a children's hospital, which North Korea doesn't have one of until now. Complete unit which they've never seen before in North Korea. We were able to ship as part of one of our shipments. Next slide, please. And then lots of equipment from a children's hospital in Norway that they donated, which we were able to ship as well. Next slide, please. And then this brings me on to the heart of the matter. And this is why I think it's so important to understand about Father and Mother Moon's heart and attitude to peace, how they have brought about this incredible situation that now exists in North Korea, where you have North and South Korea, total loggerheads, ready to annihilate each other at the press of a button, literally, with a lot of help from America, or hindrance from America, depending on how you see it. And they suffered, particularly Father Moon suffered. They are both from North Korea. Maybe we can have the next slide. That meeting that I mentioned, that is on that slide, that took place in 1991, but it took place after decades, literally decades, of the dictator of North Korea trying to kill and assassinate Father Moon. Father Moon says that the CIA told him that they had 82 instances where people were trying to assassinate him. One incident was, which was not all that long ago, it was I guess in the late 80s, when a truck bomb was intercepted by the FBI just at the entrance, to those of you who know New York, to the Lincoln Tunnel. And it was on its way, it was stopped, and the driver was arrested, and the contents obviously were taken away. But the driver was interrogated, and he admitted he was on his way to Reverend Moon's home in upstate New York to basically blow the place to smithereens. That is a true story. It's reported in the media. Okay, I'll mention that in a second. Anyway, he suffered all of those many decades of that kind of persecution. He was in a death camp. He survived a death camp. He was sentenced to death. He was liberated by the UN forces in the early 50s by General MacArthur. And he escaped Kim Il-sung's attentions in that way as well. Throughout those 40 years or so, all of those different incidents have happened. He was declared officially as the #1 enemy of North Korea. So you can understand how almost miraculous, you'd say in biblical terms, it was that when in 1991, in I think it was November or December of 1991, he was able to actually go to North Korea, into the enemy's lair, into the country that had tried to kill him 88 times. He'd been in a death camp there. He was declared as public enemy #1. And he went there, and he was invited to speak in the, talk about rubber stamp parliaments, in the National Assembly, or the People's Assembly of North Korea. And he went there, and he let loose a tirade of condemnation of the Juche ideology. This is the communist Marxist type, but uniquely North Korean ideology that has guided North Korea under the Kim dynasty since the late 1940s, I guess, the early 1950s. And I know, because I've talked to them, the people who were with him, some of them I know very well, they thought, this is it. We're going to be marched out, put against a wall and shot. Because he was so clear. He said, this ideology is entirely false. This is to the whole assembly of anyone who was anyone in North Korea at that time, in the early 1990s. Of course, all appointed by the regime, but nonetheless important for that. And even the people who were escorting him, they were fearful that they were also going to be shot. But instead, they were taken out and taken to, and I'll show you actually that picture that we saw was of meeting Kim Il-sung after that. And when they got to Kim Il-sung, actually he was radiant. He was so happy to meet them. He embraced them. They had hours of conversations and discussions. They came from a similar part of North Korea. And since that time, they became, in a sense, real friends, brothers. And this is, again, if I had a day, I couldn't go into all the reasons why this happened and all the effort that was behind it. But it truly was a miraculous thing. And Christy Davis, professor of sociology at Reading, who passed away sadly a few months ago, he said that in his lifetime, this was one of the most miraculous things he'd ever heard of, that this could happen. So I'd encourage you to look into more detail how that happened. But really the key point, if we could move forward to again to the slide, is that since that time, the relationship has gone from strength to strength. Even in spite of everything that's happened, all the breakdowns that happened on the Korean Peninsula, the increased cooperation has happened, and North Korea, instead of regarding Father Moon as enemy #1, just actually on when he was, his funeral ceremony was being held in Korea, he was awarded the highest honor that North Korea can bestow for reunification purposes. So anyway, cut a very long story short, the relationship between the Moon family and the Kim family, despite all the things that have happened, is very, very strong still. And they were able to show great forgiveness for all the terrible wrongs that were done by the North Koreans to them. And this has so deeply touched the heart of the Kims that they have honored them ever since, and they look to them as the ones who can bring about reunification, as evidenced not least by the fact that the highest award, the Grand National Reunification Prize it was called, was awarded to Father Moon when he passed away. So there is in place this unique relationship. Robin and I have both had this experience talking to Foreign Office officials from around Europe. They say, you've got some kind of special relation. We don't really understand it, but you have some very special influence that we just can't fathom. And the essence of that relationship is a heart of love, is a heart of forgiveness. Because instead of being pilloried as a sick puppy or whatever, as happened last week, the language that Father and Mother Moon and the heart that Mother Moon have extended to the regime has been a heart of love. And they feel that, and they feel very, very comforted by that, and it gives them confidence to have proper dialogue. And so this is in place, and Mother Moon has a long-standing invitation to go to North Korea and to be a sort of a mediator, a conciliator between North and South Korea. So that is the UPF approach to peace. It is based on Father and Mother Moon's life. Forgive your enemy, love your enemy. That is the way. Through deep-hearted diplomacy, we can say, not by bellicose rhetoric, not by bringing all the forces at your disposal to surround the country and point all of your guns. Diplomacy is the key, based on love, based on heart, based on conciliation. And that, I believe, ultimately will solve the crisis. I don't think it's going to happen this week, this year, or even next year. Or it might happen by around about 2020 or the early 2020s. That's my gut feeling. But anyway, this is the essence of what, in terms of diplomacy, civil society initiatives, this is what Father and Mother Moon stand for, and this is what UPF is there to represent, that kind of diplomacy. So can we just check? I'm not sure what the last slide is. Yeah, here we go. Just the keys to the peace on the Korean Peninsula. The logic of love, not the logic of power. Unconditional love and forgiveness, not retribution. Reconciliation, not primarily using political means, but what's called by professionals in the business track 2 diplomacy, which is basically diplomacy, but not done by governments, but by civil society groups like UPF and of course other groups as well. This is the way forward. We believe this is the way that the problem will be solved. Thank you very much.